Component number 5 that I'm going to talk about is lysozyme. I'm sure most of you remember hearing about this in grade school or certainly in undergraduate biology. This is an antimicrobial enzyme specifically effective against many gram-positive bacteria. This is excreted in some fluids, most famously in tears, but also on the surface of the skin. Lysozyme levels are reduced with vitamin D deficiency and enhanced with vitamin D repletion or VDR activation. From this article in Frontiers of Immunology, 2020, January, vitamin D upregulates antimicrobial peptide, messenger RNA, and protein expression, including cathelicidin, defensin, and lysozyme. Another article, also published in 2020, stated that loss of VDR functions causes changes in the microbiota and lowers host defense by reducing production of cathelicidin, lysozyme, and autophagy-related protein ATG16L1. Let's look now at a recently published article from Gastroenterology, November 2020. The title of this article is Panth Cell Alertness to Pathogens is Maintained by Vitamin D Receptors. The authors here state, decreased intestinal VDR significantly correlates with a reduction in levels of ATG16L1 and Panth cell lysozymes in patients with Crohn's disease. The authors state that the clinical importance of this finding is that targeting the vitamin D receptor affects multiple downstream events within Panth cells in host defense and anti-inflammation. So basically what they showed here is that vitamin D signaling was necessary for Panth cells to produce lysozyme. Let's look at this diagram from the article, showing that in the normal situation, the epithelium responds to the microbiome by maintaining some sense of balance between normal physiology and a bit of inflammation that you can see here. When these Panth cells are deprived of vitamin D signaling, they reduce their production of antimicrobial peptides, and that promotes not only dysbiosis, but also more inflammation in response to that dysbiosis, which of course leads to a vicious cycle. So what we see with dysbiosis consistently across virtually all models and across all species is that it becomes a vicious cycle of microbial imbalance and increased inflammatory response. The microbial imbalance drives more inflammation, but more inflammation also drives the perpetuation of dysbiosis. And some of you may be aware that I detailed that in the microbiome and dysbiosis program that we started back in 2015 and which took me 2 years to complete into 2017. So I'll talk a little bit about that later as related to that video series and the resulting little textbook publication. Now let's talk about secretory IgA. So secretory IgA is the chief immune globulin on mucosal surfaces. It is defensive against infections, but it's also protective or tolerogenic toward beneficial bacteria. Secretory IgA deficiency is the most common genotropic immunodeficiency, affecting about 1 per 600 people.